a lot of people getting scammed. If you try to find some of the biggest Bitcoin scams in the past 5 or 10 years, most of them have been in South Africa. African currencies are on a downward spiral. We need to give everyone the ability to send and receive Bitcoin. The Naira, the shilling, the South African rand versus Bitcoin. Bitcoin is stable. You don't have a choice but to use Bitcoin.
What do you think is holding us back right now?
A lot of people don't see.
I saw you the first time on X, I think a few days ago, and when the African Bitcoiners X channel declared you as the most impactful person in the African Bitcoiner space of 2023. And I was like, I have to get to know you. And I think our podcast audience also wants to get to know you and what you have done for the African community. And I saw that you also founded 2 companies. So first of all, I wanted to know, what does it mean to be from the African Bitcoiner account the most impactful Bitcoiner? Like, what is that from an award? Where is it coming from? And why did you get it? Like, what have you done to achieve that achievement?
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think for the first part of the question, it probably would be best if you got someone directly from the African Bitcoiners to actually, give a little history of how that list is composed and how it was last year. I think this is the second year they're doing it as well. So yeah, but on my side, I could talk about the work that I've been doing with regards to Exonomia and Machankura, right? So effectively, what I'd like to do is accelerate the adoption of Bitcoin across the African continent, right? So even in both companies, I don't see myself like as the CEO. I see myself as like the catalyst, right? So catalyst by the true scientific definition of the word, right? Like really accelerate the reaction without getting burnt out, right? Yeah, because I also would like to do other things out after this, but then reasons for why the 2 companies exist. Exonomia, first reason is it's a company focused on translating literature that explains how Bitcoin works into African languages. And yeah, so the reason behind that is effectively, if you are gonna have like a Bitcoin community wherever in the world that you're gonna have that community, at some point you would want to share some literature for people to consume or for people to understand what Bitcoin is and how it works or whatever else you'd like to share. So yeah, having that content translated would help. So Exonomia aims to do that across the African continent. So far we've had like over 10 languages in 10 different countries, and yeah, we will continue doing that, although we're gonna have to figure out how to make it work in a more decentralized fashion so that we can get to even more countries that we don't necessarily even understand what those people in those countries are saying. And 2, comes to Machankura. So Machankura is a business that gives people without an internet connected device the ability to send and receive Bitcoin, right? And the reason why it exists is effectively the low internet penetration levels across the African continent. There's like 30% internet penetration levels across the African continent. So if you want people to adopt Bitcoin, they need the ability to send and receive Bitcoin, right? So if a person does not have the ability to send and receive Bitcoin, then they cannot participate, no matter how much of it they understand. They are not doing the one thing that they are supposed to do, which is either send, hold, or receive Bitcoin, right? So yeah, so Machangura primarily works as a USSD service, and it's similar to something called Please Call Me in South Africa. You just dial a number like *121*, blah 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 hash, and then your phone knows what to do from there because it's a GSM standard. It's also similar to how mobile money works. So mobile money, usually people dial the USSD code for the mobile money operator, and then they get to send money wherever they are sending money. So a few things then regarding Machankura that um, pushed me to also do it, right? Because one of the things was, if for me that I was looking at was, if the service wasn't going to work well without for a person without a smartphone, I wasn't going to do it, right? So some of the things you have to think about is, on a smartphone you have copy and paste functionality, right? On a feature phone you may not have copy and paste functionality. So things like a Bitcoin address, things like a lightning invoice become very unusable on feature phone, because the person may not have copy and paste functionality, and if they're going to type it out in full, they're going to make a mistake, right? So for Bitcoin addresses, at least, there's a checksum. But character length might be too long for most people, like 60 characters, for them to not make a mistake. But at least the checksum will check for them and say, oh, you made a mistake here. Anyway, the thing that was there that made me feel like, okay, this can be done, was the lightning address. So the lightning address is that thing that looks like an email, where it's your username at whatever domain, right? So mine is Kgothatso at 833.mobi. So whichever country or whichever wallet you are using, you could send sats to me at Kgothatso at 833.mobi. And yeah, my users could also type out, like, if yours is sorry, post box 47 at Wallet of Satoshi, or Killmonger 42 at Wallet of Satoshi as well. You can then I can then send sats to you by just typing it out, right? So some of the things you need to understand then with regards to USSD is how it's different from SMS. Right? So SMS and USSD are technically the same technology stack, but the difference that most normal people would get is that, or normal, by normal I mean non-technical, is that SMS is charged per SMS sent, and USSD is charged at the amount of time spent. Right. So within the time intervals, you can send as many messages back and forth as you want. So it it also has like a 20-second session timeout. So if you do not send a message within 20 seconds, your session times out. And yeah, so within that 20 seconds, you can still send and receive as many messages, but 20-second intervals you get charged. But USSD gateway providers usually then charge you on 60 seconds to make the calculation much easier than 20 seconds. So yeah, I think that is basically the best summary I could give regarding the two services. I don't know if you'd have any questions, Rob.
It's amazing because I myself live in Austria, and here I don't know any single person who does not have a smartphone. And another standpoint is, I don't know a single person who does not has a banking account. But this is not reality in Africa. I looked a few numbers up before the podcast, and I saw that only like 30 to 40% in Africa are even banked. How different are Africans viewing Bitcoin, because maybe they're not in that privileged situation where everybody has a bank account, everybody has an internet connection, and this was also maybe your motivation to make Machankura the mobile service without an internet connection. Like, this is pretty amazing what you're doing, and for Africans.
Yes, yeah. So I believe that a lot of Africans view Bitcoin with a lot of interest, right? And in South Africa specifically, which is where I live, that interest has resulted in a lot of people getting scammed. If you try to find some of the biggest Bitcoin scams in the past 5 or 10 years, most of them have been in South Africa, whether that's as MTI Global or those Durban twins who reportedly scam people out of billions. I don't know, but yeah. So has also left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. So yeah, but still the interest is there because the need for Bitcoin is not necessarily just with regards to who's banked and unbanked, but with regards to the fact that a lot of African currencies are on a downward spiral, right? So Seyfedina Moose has a few podcast episodes, and I think probably in a few of his books, where he compares currencies performances internationally, right? And I think he said on average, what is this? Currencies inflate at 14%, right? But then the strong currencies are outliers, like the USD and the euro, but the vast majority of currencies are inflating at a much quicker pace, right? So if you have inflation at a rate of 14%, you cannot save, you cannot, even you cannot afford the same living standard, right? So I like to talk about my high school days. In high school, we usually all get to pick a career. We usually also pick where we want to be at what point. If you are that type of person, you could also just go with the flow. So I have a friend who was studying accounting in high school, and he decided that okay, that will be his career path, right? And so he also decided how much money he would want to be paid at a certain point for the type of lifestyle he wanted to have, like 2 kids, two cars, and a 3 bedroom house. And at the time, it was like 2010, around 2010, 2011, he decided that for that type of lifestyle, he would need 600,000 annual income, 600,000 rands at annual income. And yeah, it made sense back then. But 10 years later, he will not be able to afford that type of lifestyle with 2 kids, 2 cars, a 3 bedroom house, right? Because property prices have shot up in the past 10 years by probably double, right? Car prices have shot up also in the past 10 years by more than double. So for him to afford that type of lifestyle, he may have to earn double what he had believed he should have earned, right? Initially, instead of 600,000, he should be earning 1.2 million. So the issue then becomes it takes a person usually 10 years or 5 years, depending on how persistent they are, 5 to 10 years to get to where they want to get in their career. And by the time they get to that point, they then discover that the money has lost so much value that they need to recalculate and recalibrate. So, yeah, a lot of that I think is happening through the African continent, and a lot of people are then looking for alternatives. And Bitcoin has been this recurring thing that has been coming up in conversations for a lot of people. So they're like, okay, maybe I should try it out. And yeah, so then for me, I look at it as from the perspective that okay, if it is gonna deliver on the promise of being better than money, right? What do we need? And I think the first thing we need is everyone with the ability. We need to give everyone the ability to send and receive Bitcoin, because if you come to me with Bitcoin and you say you want to give it to me, if I'm not able to receive it, that transaction is not going to happen, right? And yeah, then for the point specifically on the unbanked, right, part of the reason why the levels of unbanked people is where it is today is the KYC requirements, right? So to open a bank account, you need an ID and a proof of residence. But 50% of the African population does not have an ID or proof of residence. So how are they going to open a bank account? Right. And I do not believe that at the current moment, any of the Bitcoin companies are pitching that specifically. The fact that, oh, Bitcoin is just math. So for you to open or to use a Bitcoin wallet, all you need is an app or a calculator, depending on how integrate you want to be with your use of it. And yeah, that's about it. You don't need to give us your ID, you don't need to do whatever. And yeah, you could also do this self-custodially, which is what makes it even more powerful, right? So if we are going to solve the problems of unbanked, which technically are already being solved in Africa with services like M-Pesa, that do digital payments via the telecom network, because even though most people do not have a bank account, the vast majority of the people on the continent have a cellular connection on feature phones, not necessarily on smartphones. So can you build something that works for people in that regard? And that is what I think Bitcoin should be doing as well.
When you talk about all the things you just talked about, and people are needing Bitcoin to transfer money, they need Bitcoin to save their financial energy, uh,
Mm-hmm.
because the currency is just devaluing on such a rapid pace. Um, why, like, what are the misconceptions people in Africa still have about Bitcoin, that not everybody is in there? Like, we still, all around the world, we have a small percentage still in Bitcoin. Only like a small group of informed individuals are using that, and you and yourself are working on accelerating that transition. But what do you see as the main misconceptions African no coiners have to get into Bitcoin? I'm asking that question because I'm curious if it's different, maybe from like a European standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think it largely depends which country you're in, right? So each country, and okay, let's not even look at countries, but the type of person you're dealing with, right? So a low-income person, one of the major misconceptions they would have with regards to Bitcoin is that you need a lot of money to acquire Bitcoin, right? When you could just acquire one set for however many shillings you have in your pocket, and shillings are usually the or some of the weakest currencies in the African continent. Whether this is, no offense to my people, whether this is the Uganda shilling or the Kenya shilling, usually, yeah, but you can get like one set for like one Uganda shilling, actually maybe two Uganda shillings, because they're also on the downward spiral. $1 is what, worth 150 Kenyan shillings, right? So you could still get some sats with that. I think like a few thousand sats with that. But then the thing is, yeah, if you're a low income person, you believe that you need a lot of money to acquire Bitcoin. So yeah, and this is then the other weird thing, and especially for South Africa, because it doesn't mean if a person is a low income person, they are not able to afford expensive things, which is weird. But then they don't do it for the right reasons, or they go through the wrong places to acquire their Bitcoin, and then they get scammed. So it is what it is. Then there's the middle income people, which have their own misconceptions, and usually those misconceptions are rooted in, what's the word I'm looking for, maybe trust in the government. Yeah, and they do not see the need to jump ship. Some already do, but they still trust in the government, they still trust in the pension fund, so on and so forth. But I think that trust is quickly eroding for most people in the middle class. And who else is there? Oh yeah, then the higher class people also have their own misconceptions, because they believe that property is the way, stocks are the way, so on and so forth, which is right. But in some cases, it is wrong, right? And especially if you're living in a country with a very volatile political environment, such as South Africa, and where if you're investing in stocks, you generally want to invest in the best performing companies in the whole world, not just in the best performing companies in your own country. Yeah. So if you do not have access to those markets, then you're losing out. But a lot of the high income people have access to global markets, so it's not a problem for them. And then it goes back to the middle income people who don't necessarily have access to global markets. They could if they wanted to, but they may not know about that, and they still invested in the local markets. So yeah, then there's something else like no coiners, merchants, something. So merchants have their own misconceptions as well. Like no coiners have their own misconceptions as well. So I could technically go down that path for the rest of the day. But yeah, I don't know what you say about that.
That's amazing because it's pretty much the same what I see with every Bitcoiner I ever spoke to. Like it's basically the I agree with every single class you described. I also see it in Austria. I talked earlier this day with a guy from Australia. With whomever I speak, and I often try to get this topic up. What are the misconceptions about Bitcoin from non-Bitcoin people? It's always the same. I was curious. Maybe I never spoke with African Bitcoiners. Maybe it's different, but it turns out it's pretty much the same thing. And you, you didn't had these misconceptions, or maybe you overcome those misconceptions. When did you first saw Bitcoin? How long did it took you personally to get into Bitcoin, and why did you overcame those misconceptions?
So let me think, right? So for me, it's a thing of university. Right? So, generally, I was like low income, at the start of university years, and as the years progressed, moving in middle income, maybe argue for high income as well, specifically for South Africa. So for me, in university there was a class on Bitcoin, and the lecture started the class by saying this will not be in the exam, so I didn't pay any attention to it. And then I think the following year after that, I was doing some stuff on the internet and I was offered a payment, and I could either accept the payment via Bitcoin or PayPal. And yeah, I did assessment, a personal assessment. I was like, okay, what am I going to do with this Bitcoin after I receive it? Right, so I had two options. The first option was, okay, well, of course, accept the Bitcoin, but keep it because there's nothing I could do with the Bitcoin. Second option was accept the payment via PayPal because then, I could use it online on eBay, on Bandcamp, wherever. And then I was like, okay, cool. Let me use the PayPal option because I've seen some songs on Bandcamp that I actually wanted to buy, and I wanted to get a new laptop, dev some more, so on and so forth. Great stuff. And then the following year after that, the 2017 bull market is happening. And then I'm like, hey, why didn't I not take the Bitcoin? And yeah, so then for me, it was like, oh, this thing that was worth around 1,000 US dollars at the time is now worth 20 US dollars. So I missed out on like 20 times the value had I just took the Bitcoin and sat on it. But of course, at the time, what hodl was not in my vocabulary, right? So then what happened? Then the other thing is, I was trying to put disposable income somewhere, right? So then I was looking at options, and as I was saying, explored stocks, explored property, explored all of these different things. And even as the Bitcoin price was increasing, I was like, I could have then used that money for property, blah 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 blah. But then I started reading up on economics, and then started reading up on a lot more on Bitcoin. And then I was like, oh, okay, so this Bitcoin thing is quite stable. And even from an investment perspective, the things you're looking for, the investments where you can put your money in them and then walk away, right? And then hold for many, many years. Right? So this is similar to how Warren Buffett does value investing, or similar to how Michael Saylor's thesis on investing in Bitcoin goes. Like, just buy your Bitcoin and or never sell. So yeah, then I came to the same conclusion, and then I was like, it would be great for other people to, well, specifically people from my communities, to learn the same thing about Bitcoin, and that's why Exonomia and Machankura was born. But even through that, for me, there was another thing, because I was like, why was I a middle income earner at the time, which is at my first job? And yeah, so I think being part of the Bitcoin community kind of helped me answer that question. There was a job I applied to, but that job would have kept me as a middle income earner still. So what I did was look at where I could earn relatively high amounts, right? Because I'm a software developer, and if you do a Google search as a South African for what American junior software developers are earning, you're like, wait, that's like R1 million in South Africa. So why is it not the case in South Africa, where a junior dev earns what, it's still a good amount of money for South Africa, but then it's not competitive globally, right? So I think it was like 30,000 rands or 25,000 rands, depending on which country you're going to per month, and it would be like, I don't want to do the math, times that by 12 to get what the annual income is. And oh yeah, it would be like 300,000 rands or 400,000 rands or something like that. Cool.
Yeah.
So then I came across some discussions by Bitcoin developers, right? I think the guy is called ZCXMP, whatever. He just got a grant from Spiral. And one of the things he said was specifically on the amount of the grant and on the topic of where he's based, right? So apparently from his timestamps, people assume that he's based in Asia, but he's a pseudonym. So he's saying technically he's not confirming or denying the assumptions that he's based in an Asian country like the Philippines or Thailand or something like that. And then some people are then saying the grant amount is too high for a developer in the Philippines or that those parts of Asia. And his argument is generally, for the living standard that a developer in the US, in New York, in San Francisco, in California, wherever else, for a developer in Asia to live the very same to have the very same living standard, they are going to ultimately have to spend the same amount of money as those developers in New York, wherever else in America, right? So if you look at me right now, I'm sweating, right? So I need aircon in my room because it's a summertime in South Africa, right? But to have aircon and to afford good air conditioning, I would need to effectively earn the same amount as a person who's living in New York or Europe or wherever else, and places that generally have air conditioning in all their homes, right? So if you are earning the same as a local developer in whichever country you are living, you are not able to afford the same living standard as a developer anywhere else in the world, right? Or in specifically in the places where those developers are earning the same amount of money. So what you would generally need to do is move to those countries where you're gonna earn, top dollar, right? Or you could just work remotely, and that's the beauty of Bitcoin, right? So some countries like South Africa, we do have international companies that have headquarters in the country, specifically AWS. I think Microsoft may also have some offices, and yeah, so I was like, okay, let me just apply for a job there, and then I got the job, and then I was like, okay, cool, this is good living. And yeah, effectively then for me, I never had to deal with those misconceptions per se, because my journey with Bitcoin has just also been me transitioning between income classes.
Oh,
Hello,
great.
Robin.
Yeah, yeah. I'm still here. And did
Mhm.
you ever played around also with altcoins?
Oh yes, of course, right? So yeah, 2017 bull market. I'm then tuning in, and all I see is people talking about the next Bitcoin. People talking about the silver to Bitcoin's gold. People talking about yada yada, all these different things. And yeah, then I was like, okay, maybe I should dabble a bit. Maybe I can also, since I already missed this Bitcoin train from $1,000 to $22,000, maybe I can, get catch something else. So yeah, effectively, Binance was there. I was just putting money on everything, getting listed on Binance. And yeah, 2020, 2018 happened, and the bear market effectively started, and it was just like going like this, and then, just cold turkey, everything went down. So yeah, for me, I was like, okay, maybe there's something I'm not getting. But what really drove the message across with regards to altcoins and the dangers of altcoins and why a person should be Bitcoin only was that Binance later implemented a dust page, right? So, to anyone who does not know what dust is on Binance, is if the token you've bought has lost so much value that you cannot trade it on the engine anymore, you go to that page, and that page converts it for you into BNB, and then hopefully the accumulation of your dust tokens can be enough for you to trade that BNB for Bitcoin, right? So yeah, even though that page was there, there were some tokens I was unable to even convert into BNB because they were illiquid, right? So yeah, that's when I was like, okay, no more shitcoining for me, and I was Bitcoin all the way.
Yeah, so so basically you went through the typical get wrecked and then go Bitcoin only route that a lot of
Yeah.
people, also me, went through. I also went through a shitcoin phase, as I referred to. Um, you said something that struck me, and I noted it here. You said, "Oh, Bitcoin is stable." Because nobody in my environment thinks that Bitcoin is stable. Even Bitcoiners are like, it's one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin, yes, but
Mm-hmm.
compared to euro and US dollar, like it fluctuates. You can say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, one Bitcoin is still one Bitcoin, but in our local currency, it fluctuates a lot. Why did you find Bitcoin stable? And is this something that's normal in Africa?
Yeah, sorry about that. I just wanted to plug something in. Oh yeah, so there's many ways to look at it. Right? So yeah, I think how you look at it is how most people look at it, and they look at it relative to their own national currency and determine whether or not it's stable. So if you are living in Africa, whatever currency you're using, the CFA, well, maybe not the CFA, but because the CFA is a stable coin, but the naira, the shilling, the South African rand versus Bitcoin. Bitcoin is stable. Yeah. I honestly believe that Bitcoin, African currencies are more volatile than Bitcoin. Right? Adding to the fact that Bitcoin is at least volatile upwards, then a person is doing themselves a disservice by using African currency. For that matter. And even let's say the CFA, which is Africa's stable coin, technically it has been one of the few currencies that has managed to keep a stable value in Africa over the past 20, 30 years even. Okay, maybe not 30 because it also has its own dramas where it gets devalued and stuff. But what generally happens is that there's a lot of things you want to do with the CFA that you cannot just do without, the currency passing through France, the France central bank, whatever, all that drama. You probably should have an episode on the CFA one day if you don't already have one. And cool. Then the other way to look at it for me is relative to everything else. Like if you look at well, when we used to have the gold standard and you look at the gold price, because the dollar was pegged to a certain amount of gold, a certain weight of gold, and it the chart for me looked similar to Bitcoin's chart. Even now, well, especially from like 2020, from 2020 to like 2023. If you look at the gold chart from 1990 to 1993, man, from 1900 to 1930, or 1930 to, you just pick a timeline. For me, it felt like, okay, this is how the Bitcoin price works, right? And then I think the fiat stableness is a misconception, because at the end of the day, fiat currencies are pegged to nothing. Right? So whether or not they maintain whatever they maintain is a misconception, because they're not pegged to anything. Like, okay, this thing that is a unit upon itself, which is not pegged to anything else, is maintaining its value inflated at rates that are not being officially reported because they don't see money printing as inflation, and so on and so forth, right? So then for me, what matters to a person is, you go to the grocery store and you buy goods at a certain price today, right? Then you're gonna go tomorrow. Then you're gonna go next week. Then you're gonna go next month. It's impossible for you to pay the same prices for whatever you were buying today as you would buy tomorrow and next week and next month and next year. It's close to impossible, right? No matter what currency you're using, because we are living in a world that has entropy in it, right? So fiat and industrialization aims to create this artificial stableness, right? It's good for big corporate, but it's impossible to achieve. That's why we have futures markets, so that the cost of what productive goods, I think that's what it's called, can be paid at a set price so that a big corporate can budget for stuff. But what usually should have happened is, just the price, yesterday's price is not today's price, as Fat Joe would say, because we live in a world of entropy. Something happened, fuel prices went up, it rained, the roads were not as good to drive on as we expected, so there was a delay, so demand and supply had to play a role, so on and so forth. So yeah, ultimately I believe that that thing is fiat stableness is an artificial construct. And yeah, the other way, though, and my preferred way of looking at Bitcoin stability is the fact that regardless of whatever is happening in the world, TikTok next block, right? So regardless of, well, specifically the one Bitcoin is equals to one Bitcoin, that's very important. But you know that despite the political landscape, despite the geopolitical landscape, wars, genocides, anything happening in the world, Bitcoin is still functioning. And in fact, if you're a country at war, you are incentivized. Well, not really incentivized because you don't have a choice but to use Bitcoin. Your central bank may not be functioning, especially in the early days of the war, as we saw in Ukraine. So what are you gonna do, right? So yeah, for me, that's why I think Bitcoin is stable.
It's an amazing explanation, actually. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
You are trying also, I saw something on your tweet timeline with Bitcoin Cape Town and Bitcoin Ekasi. Can you
Mm-hmm.
quickly also go over what that is and what's your involvement in there, or are you not involved in that? Did I misinterpret that?
No, you're correct. We hosting Adopting Bitcoin in Cape Town, right? So
Yeah.
co-hosting it with Bitcoin Ekasi and the great people who run Adopting Bitcoin, and yeah, so feel free to come through, everyone. It's going to be a very great conference. We aim to bring through what is this? Well, of course, the best Bitcoin companies around the world, but also what we're doing, we are bringing parallel institutions to the space, right? Because one of the things that or some of the things that work very well in South Africa are because there's parallel institutions, right? Institutions that are not necessarily government institutions, but at the same time, the government is in a pickle, or puts us in a pickle because we end up being grey listed and all of these different things. So you have to ask a question of how do these parallel institutions continue delivering the great services that they are delivering without good enough money, money that they could easily send to whoever they need to send it to and receive it from whomever they needed to receive it from, right? So if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a parallel institution and you have to fill out 5 forms to receive a payment and 6 forms to send a payment, you are losing time where it could be better spent doing something else. So yeah, what we want to do is effectively bring these people together, right, and show them that, oh, okay, cool, you guys are doing great work, but you should consider using Bitcoin. Oh, you Bitcoiners are doing great work, but you should consider building stuff for these people. So yeah, that is what we are doing with Adopting Bitcoin Cape Town. We have a few great speakers lined up, notable honorable mentions as Anita Porsche. Of course, she's been all around Africa, trying to also accelerate the adoption of Bitcoin across the continent. And Karel van Wyk, this is a guy who built out CryptoConvert, and he's also co-founder of Luna. And CryptoConvert is basically the reason why you can go to any Pick and Pay in South Africa and pay using a Lightning wallet through his app, which converts the QR code that they show you at the till into a Lightning invoice. And a few other notable people like Craig Rowe, he's the guy who built Sparrow Wallet, and Herman from Bitcoin Ekasi, of course. If you haven't been to Muscle Bay, the third day of the conference is going to have a road trip to Muscle Bay. Not for everyone. So talk to us nice, and then we're going to add you on that road trip. If you don't talk to us nice, you can find us in Muscle Bay the next day, of course. If you want to make your own trip there, you are invited. And Jimmy Song is also coming. He's one of the best authors in the space, one of the best minds in the Bitcoin space. And yeah, read his books. His latest book is Fiat Ruins Everything. And yeah, I highly recommend you read that book. And myself, I'm going to be there. But another highlight is Marcel from Bitcoin Dada, all the way from Kenya, and she runs an organization fully focused on giving women a space in the Bitcoin ecosystem, because she one day went to a Bitcoin meetup in Kenya and she was like, I'm the only female here apart from the girl who came with her boyfriend, and the boyfriend was attending and the girl was just there to show support. And yeah, so Paco ran with Bitcoin. He was here last year, so he's coming back to South Africa once more to be here with us. And yeah, Ray Youssef from Sifkit slash No Ones. And yeah, if you do not know who Ray Youssef is, he basically is one of the hearts that are pumped. He'll be talking to us there. And there's a few people from the what is this parallel market track. Oh, and Tom from Mystico as well. Great people, great company. He'll be there. Russell Lambati from Sekalicha, probably not pronouncing that correctly, but he also has a great book. I think it's on the fall of the Zim dollar. And who else? John Andres from the Institute of Race Relations. There's someone from the Free Cities Institute, or Free Private Cities, but doesn't seem to be on the website, which is something we need to fix. And yeah, our host will be Joe Nakamoto. Well, most people know
Oh,
him as a journalist from Cointelegraph, but he's doing a lot of great stuff.
yeah, it sounds like a great lineup of great Bitcoin minds, and I love that you're
Mm-hmm.
also so involved. You are trying to accelerate the whole Bitcoin adoption movement. You're accelerating basically sound money, getting freedom, and hope to all those 8 billion peoples on the earth. For getting to the end of the podcast, what do you think is holding us back right now to really have an accelerated Bitcoin adoption? What do you see holding us as a collective group, as human society, as humans on Earth, back from adopting Bitcoin to like 50% adoption, 60% adoption, 100% adoption? What are your main thoughts about that?
So I think mainly a lot of people don't see that a lot of people are not using Bitcoin, right? So I think if you could see and understand how very little people in the greater scheme of things are using Bitcoin today, yeah, you would approach things a little different. Right? And a lot of the arguments we are having, I feel like they are theoretical when they should already be practical, because we are at a point in time where the use case for Bitcoin is being proven. Right? If the main value you present for Bitcoin is the fact that what am I about to say? Oh, the fact that it's not an inflationary currency, right? In fact, it has a cap so that it doesn't get inflated away. And countries like Turkey, Argentina, Nigeria, Kenya, even South Africa with the rand are experiencing very high levels of inflation. Then people in these countries should be already embracing Bitcoin. Right. I'm usually using the statement that drugs sell themselves. Right. So if a person is trying to get a fix, and in this case, Bitcoin is the fix for them, it's not too hard for a drug dealer to sell to this person, right? So why is it so hard for Bitcoin to get where it needs to go? And I believe it's because a lot of people do not understand that a lot of people don't use Bitcoin. Right? So if you approach it from that perspective, the first question you have to ask is, what do the things that result in people using Bitcoin actually look like? So yeah.
Oh, oh, great. How do you see CBDCs? For us Europeans, and also I think America especially, CBDCs is some word they are really fearful of. They are fearful of the possibilities that central banks are given. Uh, More than just the money printing, it's more about state control. It's about monitoring the citizens. How is CBDCs rolling out in Africa? How do you see the developments there?
Well, I think a CBDC already tried being rolled out in what was this, Nigeria, the e-naira specifically. I don't know if it's a full-fledged CBDC, but it's the e-naira anyway, and the people rejected it. Like after a year, only 1% of the population had used it. So I guess that is effectively the biggest hurdle that CBDCs are going to have to overcome. Like, why would people even use it in the first place? Right. So, yeah, so CBDCs for me are a non-factor, because like, who the hell will be using it? And a person who will be using a CBDC generally does not have a problem with it, unless of course you're talking about people in authoritarian states. But I don't believe that Austria is an authoritarian state in your regard. So we have nothing to worry about with regards to CBDCs, no matter how bad they may sound. At the end of the day, you actually have to use it for it to cause you harm. Right? So yeah, I don't see a reason why a person would use a CBDC in the same fashion that we saw people in Nigeria not using the e-naira and just sticking to whatever options were there for them until the government even pulled back some of the efforts that they were putting towards the CBDC.
There's an interesting perspective. I think a lot of European Bitcoiners are really fearful of CBDCs and the possibilities. And but I agree with you. Why should people use that? It's it's. I mean, some people fear that the government is trying to incentivize a CBDC really, really hard. Like, for example, you get better benefits, you get more freedom with a CBDC at first, that it gets adopted and people are getting used to it. Like, but there are a lot of fears around it. Right now, I don't see the fear also, as you said, and I also ask myself the question: why would you use it? But on the other side, I step out of the bubble and see normal uncles and aunts from me, and they're just using whatever the governments tell them to. But the e-naira, as you said, this was a project, and I followed that project. It was not used at all, and I think it has like an adoption rate of 1% or something. Like 99% of the people just rejected it. So I agree with you, and I am looking forward how this whole thing involves. And another point I would like to add for the CBDCs: when did the government ever created some good technology that people wanted to use? And there's a reason why all the phones are made from private companies and not from the government.
Exactly.
Um, I have an end routine on the podcast where the previous guest uh, asks a question for the next guest without knowing who is the next guest. So the previous guest asked you a question without knowing you, and the question for you is: what price would Bitcoin need to hit the coming cycle for you to sell? And no price is not an answer.
Oh, okay. So weird enough, like I don't have fiat, right? I get paid in Bitcoin. So technically I'm selling Bitcoin every month depending on how you look at it because I have expenses, right? So I would have already died if I didn't sell. So yeah, technically whatever price it hits on the month that I get paid, is the price for me, right? It could be 1 rand. If one Bitcoin is worth 1 rand, I'll still be getting paid in it. So yeah, but I'll pay for food, groceries, rent, and everything else. So for some of these things, I don't have to sell the Bitcoin because I can buy them directly. As I said, in South Africa, you can go to a grocery store and pay with Lightning for your groceries. I've orange billed my landlord so I can pay in Bitcoin for the rent, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So yeah, so whatever price it is on the date, could even be 1 rand, it could even be $1 million. I'd I'd be spending Bitcoin. I'd be living on Bitcoin.
You are completely on a Bitcoin standard, and
Mhm.
in your supermarket, like in your area, is it normal that supermarkets are accepting Lightning?
Well, not really, right? But there's a lot of strong Bitcoiners that made it happen. As I said, Karel van Veek, who worked and still building Crypto Convert, and made sure that I think probably the second largest grocery chain in the world is the one accepting Bitcoin. And yeah, so it's quite normal for you to live in an area that has a pick and pay, and you can just go down there and just buy whatever you want and pay using Lightning. And I think Paco was also in South Africa, and he made a few videos about it. And even if you don't want to use Crypto Convert, you can still use Bitrefill, which has pick and pay, checkers, and ShopRite. So yeah, so if you want to live on a Bitcoin standard in South Africa, you can buy your clothes, buy furniture, do everything else. But for rent and other things, you'd have to do the orange pilling yourself instead of waiting for somebody else to do that orange pilling on your behalf.
And that's great. I love the grassroots movement that you are contributing to, that you're accelerating the Bitcoin adoption, and I loved to have you on. It was a great pleasure and an honor to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Robin.